Okay, I just want to show you a little video clip and then tell you how in the world I got interested in finding people's ancestry. Please.
Faces of America, a search for our national heritage.
What I am and who I am and what part. Oh my goodness.
I'm gonna cry. I can't believe it.
That's one of the greatest documents I've ever seen. That is fantastic.
What are we looking at?
Now Henry Louis Gates Jr. is back with a 10-part series illuminating our shared American history.
I find history interesting, but I'd never really think of it as my own family history, you know?
Finding your roots. The series journeys into the past with a constellation of renowned Americans, broadcasters, entertainers, educators, spiritual leaders, and public servants.
Gosh.
Whoa.
The headstone here is actually sunk into the ground, but there's more writing on here.
Research reveals startling surprises in each book of life.
Oh my God. Well, the story gets more interesting, so I'd like for you to keep reading.
Oh my gosh.
Do you think your father ever thought about this?
I don't know. If he did, he never talked about it.
The plot thickens.
With your permission, we'd also like to find out if you are a direct descendant of King Edward I of England on your father's side.
Of course I'm cool with that.
Yeah. So this is your Kunta Kinte moment, man. How do you say that in Hebrew? You know that we're interviewing your husband, Kevin Bacon. Is there anything that you hope to learn about his family tree?
My biggest fear is that we're cousins.
And every family history needs a family name.
Is there anything in particular that you'd like to know about your family tree?
One is my dad's lineage as a whole. We don't even know where the name Booker came from. We only have suspicions.
Getzel Warrenwasser, 36 years old, showed us a male child to whom was given the name Abraham Isaac.
Abram Itzhak Warrenwasser.
Where's the Booker name? Do you have any idea? You're gonna make up a story, because you don't know.
Have you ever heard of this name, Warrenwasser?
Never.
Well, it means warm water. And in 1910, they changed their name to Walters. Would you please turn the page?
Sure. First Booker Frank.
Right.
So my great-grandfather was a fireman on the Southern Railroad.
And there it is, right there in Knoxville, Tennessee.
So I'm Barbara Warrenwasser. Barbara Warmwater. I like Barbara Warmwater.
Mystery solved. Oh? We got our name is from a fireman on the Southern Railroad.
You know he was hot stuff.
Your fifth great-grandfather, McCullough, owned a ship. Guess what the ship was called?
What?
The Rattlesnake.
That's badass.
Your ancestor was infamous for sailing in the West Indies. The British Crown proclaimed 5,000 guinea reward for David McCullough's head.
That's so cool.
He sounds like the original Jack Sparrow.
Yeah, he does. That's unbelievable.
Johnny Depp has nothing on your ancestor.
For some, history repeats itself.
John, this is a page from the voter registration rolls for Alabama in the year 1867. Could you read the transcribed name?
Carter Tobias.
Your great-great-grandfather, Tobias Carter, registered to vote as a citizen of the United States of America in 1867, 2 years after he was freed from slavery. The second he could register to vote.
So maybe, just maybe, it's part of my DNA, my bloodline, or whatever you want to call it. This is incredible. This is too much.
You start to see this family tree and really wonder about who these people were and what they were like and what did they give you. And I think they gave me a lot of strength.
I got over.
You never know what you're going to find. I mean, people talk talk about founding fathers, you really descend from a founding father.
Right.
You're about as American can get.
Finding your roots.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Give it up for this brother right there. All right, I have a BA in history from Yale University and a PhD in English language and literature, as they say, from the University of Cambridge. So how did a guy with my credentials end up doing TV shows about ancestry? Well, it all started the day I met this woman. Now, this is the oldest Gates that we've ever found on our family tree. She was my great-great-grandmother. She was born, as you can see, in 1819. She died in 1888. Obviously, I didn't meet her, but it's the day that I first saw this photograph. And I remember it like it was yesterday, because it was the day that we buried my grandfather, Edward St. Lawrence Gates, July 3rd, 1960, and I was the same age as AJ's son, Lucas. I was 9 years old. So here's how it all came about. Jane Gates had 5 children, and they all looked white. This is her son, from whom I'm directly descended, and you see he looks white. That's our farm in West Virginia. By the way, I grew up in Piedmont, West Virginia, which is halfway between Pittsburgh and Washington, D.C., in the Allegheny Mountains on the Potomac River. Well-known center of African-American culture, right? They got no black people up there, but my family. And they were all my cousins, which made it rough at dating time, you know? That kissing cousin thing is not an idle metaphor, but I digress. So Edward Gates was born a slave too, 1857, and that's my great-grandmother Maud. My older daughter's name is Maud. And then he had a son, it's Edward St. Lawrence Gates, and he was born in 1879, he died in 1860. And I'm standing at his casket, holding my father's hand. This is Henry Louis Gates. This is the real Henry Louis Gates. And Daddy was born in 1913, died Christmas Day, 2010, 97 and a half. Isn't that a great thing? So, yeah. So I'm standing there holding his hand. I'd never been this close to a corpse before, and I was terrified. And I was looking at the corpse of my grandfather. Now, as you could see, my grandfather looked like a little white kid. He was so white, behind his back, we called him Casper. He would have killed us if he had known that. So you can imagine how white he looked dead, right? He looked like he had been coated with alabaster and sprinkled with baby powder, right? And I thought he looked ridiculous. So I'm terrified. I'm holding my father's hand, and I hear a noise coming from my father. And I thought my father was giggling, too, at how ridiculously white the Undertaker. You know, whenever I think of this, I think, how stupid. There's never been a more stupid moment in the history of human civilization than the moment I'm about to share with you. So I start to bust out laughing at how my grandfather looks. Now, we were at the Kite Funeral Home in Cumberland, Maryland. All the Gateses are in Cumberland, Maryland, and all the Colemans, my mother's family, are in Piedmont, West Virginia, 25 miles away. But Cumberland is right on the Maryland-West Virginia border. And it turns out all my ancestors on every line back 250 years, all black people, but with a lot of mixtures you'll hear, they all lived there in a 30-mile radius of where I was born. It's amazing. I don't know if that's a sign of great stability or the fact that my ancestors were too lazy ever to move. But it's great for doing genealogy. So anyway, I thought my daddy was laughing. And I looked up to share the joke. Now, why would I think my father would be laughing? Because my father, ladies and gentlemen, is the funniest human being on the face of the earth. My father makes Red Fox look like an Undertaker. I'll tell you how funny my father is, just so you'll understand why I thought that he was laughing, too. All my life, I wanted to go to Harvard or Yale, because people on TV said smart people went to Harvard or Yale. My mama said that I was smart, so that meant I was smart, right? So I wanted to go. So a miracle, I got into Yale. I've always been, as our people say, blessed in the classroom. Thank goodness. I've always done well as a student. So I did very well at Yale, and I applied to go to Oxford and Cambridge because I wanted to go to Harvard, Yale, and then I wanted to go to Oxford and Cambridge. And I applied to 7 fellowships, and I just did this very arrogantly. I applied to 7, quite cocky and overconfident, because I just knew I was going to get the first one for which I was interviewed, a Rhodes Scholarship. I was black. I was from West Virginia. I had a 2-foot-high afro. You know Cornel West Afro? Cornel West Afro. Cornel West Afro looked like a crew cut next to my afro. I had a closet full of dashiki. We mumbled some Swahili. Habarigani. We had a secret soul handshake. We would change it every month, like changing a computer code to make sure you were still black. You remember those days? So anyway, I would walk in. Basically, the only thing I didn't say was Ungawa, right? And I'd walk, and these people in the selection committee said, no way we're letting this Negro represent Yale going to England. So I lost. I didn't get a Rhodes Fellowship. I was a finalist. I didn't get it. I applied for Fulbright, a Marshall, a Caseby, all these fellowships. And the first 6 I lost. And it was very traumatic for me. So I hadn't even applied to any other graduate school. I was so overconfident. And so I went to my girlfriend, my junior year. We were junior year item. Some of you will know who she is. Her name's Linda Darling Hammond. She's a big professor at Stanford now. She was black. She had a big afro, too. You know, we were like the black power couple on campus. And I said, you know, Linda, what am I doing wrong? And she said, Skippy, that's what my mom always called me. She said, Skippy, you're just being a phony. Just go in there and be yourself. So I went into the 7th fellowship, and I was just myself, and I got it. It's one of the happiest days, other than the days that my 2 daughters were born. It's the happiest day of my life, because I got this fellowship. And I ran back to Calhoun College at Yale, and I called home. It was 4 o'clock. Now, my dad worked 2 jobs for 37 years to put my brother and me through college. And my brother, 5 years older, Dr. Paul Gates, is the chief of dentistry over at Bronx Lebanon Hospital. And Daddy would come home at 3:30 when the mill whistle would blow. We had our evening meal at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and then at 4:30 he went to his second job as a janitor. So I knew that he'd be home, and he picked up the phone. I said, Daddy, put Mom on the extension phone. Remember back in those days, you didn't have 2 phones. You had one phone and an extension phone. I don't know what genius thought of that, but that's the way it was. So Mama was upstairs in our house. She picked up the extension phone, and I said, Mama, Daddy, you'll never believe it, never believe it. I got a Mellon Fellowship. A Mellon Fellowship. I'm the first Afro-American to get a Mellon Fellowship. And without missing a beat, my daddy said, you're the first Negro to get a Mellon Fellowship? I said, yeah, Daddy. He said, they're going to call it the Watermelon Fellowship from now on. That's my daddy. So, armed with my Watermelon Fellowship, I went off to the University of Cambridge. End of parenthesis, cut back to July 3rd, 1960, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, at Kite Funeral Home in Cumberland, Maryland. And I turned to share the joke with my father, and I realized to my great embarrassment and mortification that he wasn't laughing. The noise I heard, he was crying, he was weeping in front of his father's casket. And so I thought my life had ended. But nobody, there were about 200 people in the Kite Funeral Home, and they were all fixated on my father because he was the funny man. The funny man finally was crying in public. And so nobody noticed me, but I was traumatized. So we went over to Rose Hill Cemetery, the Episcopal Cemetery. The Gateses were all Episcopalians. And we buried Pop Gates, as we called him. And when we came back, Daddy took Rocky, my brother, and me upstairs to my grandparents' bedroom. Now, we had never been upstairs in my grandparents' house. I don't know about you all, but back in the day, we had respect. You know, you didn't call an older person by your first name. You know, at Harvard, I actually have kids come up to me and say, what am I supposed to call you? And you know what I say? Do not hesitate to call me Professor. What's wrong with you? You got to earn the right to call somebody by their first name. We didn't go upstairs to my grandparents' house. My grandparents used to just disappear up the steps magically, like out of Harry Potter on a broom or something. Remember, you couldn't step on a grave, couldn't call an older person by their first name. I still refer to my parents' friends, if I'm telling my kids about them, as Miss Mary and Mr. Ozzie. That's just the way that is. So anyway, we're upstairs, we go to my grandparents' bedroom, And they have a sun porch. My cousin Johnny Gates still owns this house, which was purchased by Jane Gates in 1870. $1,200 in cash in an all-white neighborhood. And all her kids look white. Wonder how that slave got that money. So we're out on this sun porch, and there's a big armoire, big closet. And Daddy opens it. We'd never seen it before, obviously. And my grandfather worked at the First National Bank. He was a janitor at the First National Bank in Cumberland. And it was full of bank ledgers, and he was stealing these bank ledgers. Had dozens of bank ledgers. And Daddy's picking them out. Rocky and I compared notes later. We thought he was about to tell us we were rich, right? This is like dividing out the money. But soon, Daddy was crouched on the floor, and he was looking for something. He kept turning the pages feverishly. And we realized they were scrapbooks. He was stealing these bank ledgers and taping in news clippings. And Daddy went through maybe 6 of these. And finally, in the 7th bank ledger, he found what he's looking for. And he said, "Here, you boys, look at this." And we looked over his shoulder, and you know what it was? It was an obituary. And the obituary was dated January 6, 1888. And it said, "Died this day in Cumberland, Maryland, Jane Gates, an estimable colored woman." An estimable colored woman. And then Daddy said, "This is the oldest Gates that we've ever been able to trace. I never want you to forget her name." And then he pulled this photograph out between the leaves of that bank ledger. And we stared at her, and he said she was a midwife, and you could see she's in her midwifery costume. And he said, "We don't know anything else about her except that one man," she told her children, "one man who was white fathered all of her children." And she took the secret of his identity, his name, to the grave. And then he shut the bank ledger, and Rocky and I went downstairs, and we drove 25 miles home to Piedmont. And because Daddy worked 2 jobs, we always had a very nice house. And I always had my own bedroom, I had my own desk and a bookcase, and on my desk sat one of those old red Webster's dictionaries. You remember them? And the last thing I did before I went to bed was look up the word estimable, because I didn't know what it meant. And I thought, wow, if she was estimable, maybe I'm estimable too. The next day was the 4th of July, 1960. We went to the Colored Mill Picnic, and on the way back, we stopped at what we would call a convenience store, and I asked Daddy to buy me a composition book. And that night, in front of our little 12-inch black and white RCA Victor TV, I interviewed my mother and father about what only years later I would learn is called one's genealogy or one's family tree. I wanted to understand how I, with this phenotype, with these features, could be descended from a man who looked like a ghost. And I wanted to know how in the world I was related to this woman who was a slave. And I didn't even know there were slaves in West Virginia anyway. So I became hooked on that day, when I was Lucas's age, on family trees. Well, cut to 1977. What's the greatest thing happening in the history of TV? Roots. And like everybody else in America, I watch Roots. You could say that since 1977, I had a serious case of Roots envy. I wanted to be like Alex Haley and find the slave ship that brought my ancestors. I could go back to the village, find the name of the ethnic group, also formerly called the tribe that I was descended from. But nobody could do that but Alex Haley, right? Well, Bible says be careful what you wish for. In the year 2000, I got a letter from a young black scientist named Rick Kittles at Howard saying there was a new technique using mitochondrial DNA, which we all inherit from our mother. It's an identical genetic fingerprint. It's the same. We get it from your mom, and your mom's the same as her mom's, etc., back thousands of years. And using it, we could find where people from Africa, where our people came from Africa. And he came up and tested me. Well, a little while later, I got up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, just to be honest. And I got an idea. It just came from, it was like a gift from God. It was that I could combine these twin passions, this thing that was born when I was Lucas's age, out of the trauma of misunderstanding my father's reaction and seeing my oldest ancestor, right? With this new science of DNA technology, ancestry in a lab, ancestry in a test tube. And I could get 8 prominent African Americans, and I could trace their family tree back to slavery. And then when the paper trail ran out, I could analyze their DNA to see where they're from in Africa. And I stood there with tears running down my, really, it was a gift from God. And the next day I called Quincy Jones, and Quincy's daughter Rashida, you know, Rashida was on Parks and Recreation. She was my student at Harvard. And Quincy and I were really good friends. We started a .com together and sold it. So Quincy, as a jazz musician, is up all night. You know, you can't do business with Quincy until 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Quincy's like a warlock or something, you know? So 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I called and I said, Q, what if I could do for you what Alex did for himself? Quincy Jones, we forget, scored the music for Roots. And he had introduced me to Alex Haley. He said, can you do that? I go, yeah, I could do it. I didn't know if I could do it, but I knew that was I go, yeah, I can do it. He said, does it hurt? And I lied, because the part I had to leave out, because I got to stop in a minute, is that at the time they had to take a large amount of your blood. And Rick Kittles is many things. He's a brilliant geneticist, but he doesn't know shit about taking blood out of human beings. And after 45 minutes of this brother trying to find my vein, I started to say, I don't want to know where I'm from in Africa. So anyway, I wanted Quincy because he was Quincy, but I also wanted because of his best friends. Anybody know Quincy Jones' best friend? The Big O. Oprah. Quincy has a 22,000 square foot house, and one wing, only Oprah can stay there. So why did I need Quincy Jones and Oprah Winfrey? Because I needed $6 million to do this series. And so he told me, I said, Q, would you ask Oprah? I waited 30 seconds after he said yes and asked me if it would hurt. And I said, how's Rashida? How's this? How's that? Would you ask Oprah? And he said, no. But he said, I'll do you one better. I'll give you Oprah's secret name and address. And I said, what am I supposed to do with that? He said, send her a snail mail letter. And I thought, man, I've had many brush-offs in my time, but never one like this. So I said, forget it. Well, but that lasted maybe 24 hours. And the next day I sat down and wrote up a letter to Oprah Winfrey. Took it to the post office, licked the stamp. I don't even know, I don't think you lick stamps anymore, right? This is so long ago. And I put it in the mailbox. But you know what? I thought it was like putting a message in a bottle and tossing it in the Atlantic Ocean. No Oprah, no response. So I kind of forgot about it. But 2 or 3 weeks later, it was a Sunday afternoon, my cell phone rang, I looked, it was Quincy. I said, Q, what's up? And a deep woman's voice said, Dr. Gates, this is Oprah Winfrey. I said, thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Jesus. I knew the answer was yes, because rich people, and always remember this, rich people never call you with bad news. It's true. If you've asked somebody powerful or rich for a favor, and a 20th assistant, you know, twice removed calls you, you didn't get the job. But if they call you, bingo. So we did, I got Dr. Ben Carson, who was my classmate at Yale, class 73, who was very brilliant, the first pediatric neurosurgeon successfully to separate Siamese twins joined at the brain. Ben hadn't completely lost his mind over politics at that time. But he's still a very good friend of mine, even though we disagree politically. Mae Jemison, who's the first black female astronaut, MD, graduated from Stanford. See, I wanted to disappoint expectations. I didn't want to have all athletes and entertainers in my series. It's Quincy, Oprah, Chris Tucker, a brilliant comedian, T.D. Jakes. I wanted T.D. Jakes dark complected. I want a range of the wonderful browns that our people embody. And he's my homeboy from West Virginia, and he has 30,000 members of his church. And then Dr. Sarah Lawrence Lightfoot, who was my colleague at Harvard. And it was a huge hit. 8 million people tuned in to watch African American. Then we did a quick sequel. I'm gonna take 2 minutes and I'll be done. We did a quick sequel. We did Tina Turner. It's not true that I tried to do her DNA on her legs myself. That is a scurrilous rumor. And Morgan Freeman and Chris Rock, who broke down and cried. It was great. So then I got a letter from this lady who said she was of Russian Jewish descent. And she said, "Dear Dr. Gates, I've always admired your career, except now I've changed your mind. You're a big fat racist." I go, "Me?" And I kept reading, and she said, "Because you only do black people on your TV show. Why don't you do Jewish people, like me?" So I called Coca-Cola, which was my lead sponsor, along with Johnson & Johnson and Coca-Cola. I called Coca-Cola, and my account executive was a black woman named Ingrid Saunders Jones. And I said, "Ingrid, can I ask you something off the record?" She said, "Yeah." I said, "I'm holding a letter from this Jewish lady who says I'm a racist because we don't do white people." And I said, "That's my brand. I'm a professor of African and African-American studies. Can I do white people?" And there was this long pause. I thought the call had dropped. It was so long. And only later I realized that she was in a little conference. She got up and went out in the hall. And finally, she was whispering. And I said, "Ingrid? Ingrid?" And she said, "Well, Skip, there are a lot more white people drinking Coke than black people." And the result was Face of America. But then I had the problem, how do you pick white people? I know how to pick black people, because there's a lot of white people. So I decided, what would Noah do? 2 Jews, 2 Catholics, 2 Asians. Irishman, Italian, Catholic, Stephen Colbert, Meryl Streep, who's a goddess, and it was just a big hit. So then PBS gave me my own weekly show. And I thank you all for watching and being such loyal supporters. The final thing I'll say is, it's a lot of fun, but you all know how deeply moving it is to find one's ancestors, because it's a way of finding out more about yourself. So I've been working for 5 years, this will be announced very soon. I've been working for 5 years with 40 scientists and social scientists, I'm the only humanist, and to develop a curriculum through which we can use genealogy to revolutionize how we teach social studies and science in middle school. We want to try it out in the worst inner city schools, because, you see, when I was growing up, in the 50s, the blackest thing you could be was an educated man, an educated woman. Black people in this room know what I'm talking about, not an entertainer or an athlete. And far too many of our kids have lost their way, who don't believe in education anymore. And I think that if we use genealogy and genetics, you know, we go to the science class and say, if we went and said, Lisa and I said, today's lesson is Watson and Crick and the double helix, people would say, get out of town. But you say, see this Q-tip? You're going to swab your cheek, or see this test tube, you're going to spit it in the test tube. In 6 weeks, we're going to tell you where your ancestors came from Africa, and also your admixture. Because you know what? There has almost never been a black person tested by any of the 3 major DNA companies who was 100% of sub-Saharan African descent. The average African American is 24.7% white or European. And though 100% of the African American people think they're 50% Native American, they're not. How many black people in this room know that you have Native American ancestry? That you got an ancestor with high cheekbones and straight black hair? Put your hands up. Don't be ashamed. All right, none of y'all got Native American ancestry. The average, I even wrote this down, the average African American has 0.7%. 0.7% Native American ancestry. Some do, but most of us don't. But, as I said, the average African American has 24% European ancestry. And the reason your great-great-grandmother had high cheekbones and straight black hair is all that white ancestry, and that came through slavery. And we know that. Then we're going to go down the hall to social studies class, and every kid's going to have to trace her or his own family tree. They're going to go home and interview their mama. Interview their grandparents. Then we're going to show them that the federal censuses between 1790 and 1940 are all online. And we're going to teach them how to take their ancestry back to 1870. The first census went all of our people, the 3.9 million slaves of 1860, all now are human beings. They all have two names, and they're in the 1870 census. And then when they find, say, Constantine Winfrey in Oprah's case in Attala County, Mississippi, we're going to see if there were any white Winfreys in 1860 who owned a slave 10 years younger than Constantine Winfrey, her third great-grandfather. And then we'll look in the records of the white family that owned your ancestors. And with luck, they'll mention one in the tax records or in a will. And then, with a lot of luck, we can even trace descendants of the white man who owned your ancestor. Give him or her a DNA test and match it against your DNA to see if that white man was your ancestor and fathered your ancestor, mulatto ancestry in slavery. Because guess what? If we went to the NBA Finals and tested the Y-DNA of every black player on the court, which is basically all the players on the court, 35% of all black men don't descend from a black man at all, but from a white man. 35%, isn't that amazing? And we didn't know that without DNA. Anyway, my goal is that this will transform the attitude of inner city kids who have lost the love of learning, lost the belief and possibility of the self. And they can realize that learning is for them too, and learning is a black thing. Because what's genealogy all about? It's about your favorite subject. What's your favorite subject? Yourself. And so that is the real reason that I am making Finding Your Roots. Thank you, A.J. Jacobs, for bringing us together. Thank you for doing such a great work.